Welcome to the foundation of the modern business enterprise. Operations management is the engine that drives industry leaders like the Ritz-Carlton, Disney, and UPS. For you as MBA students, operations is not just a department. It's a proven path to leadership. Research consistently shows that more CEOs learn the ropes in operations than any other functional area. And the chief operating officer salaries typically trend 10% higher than other C-suite roles like the CFO or CMO. Today, we explore Chapter 1, where we define the scope of the field and critical challenge of productivity. So let's consider the example of Hard Rock Cafe. They don't sell food. They don't just sell food. They create a global experience across 27 hotels, 180 restaurants, 11 casinos in 75 countries. In their Orlando location alone, they manage the production of over 3,500 custom meals daily. So for an operations manager, this involves everything from menu design to managing a $40 million inventory of rock and roll memorabilia that must be rotated every 5 to 7 years to keep the customer experience fresh. Because that's the specialty of Hard Rock Cafe. They don't just sell food. So let's now look at the learning objectives of this course, okay? Our objectives are rigorous, defining the transformation process, identifying the 10 strategic OM decisions, mastering the computation of multi-factor productivity, a key metric for any data-driven manager. So these are the broad objectives that we will be focusing on. So now let's go to the definition of operations management. What is operations management? At its core, operation management is a set of activities that creates value by transforming inputs into outputs. So whatever activities that are required to transform inputs into outputs, what is that? In manufacturing, it may be very obvious. Let's take the example of a food truck. We understand how inputs are converted into a truck, which is the output. However, in service operations also, it is equally vital. For example, funds transfers or surgical procedures. Every organization performs 3 essential functions: marketing to generate demand, production and operations to create the product, and finance to manage the capital. So if you look at these organizational charts, the areas in the blue represent operations. It is consistently the most costly and resource-intensive part of any firm. So if you look at the organizational chart for a commercial bank, okay, look at this. What are the operations that go with the commercial bank? teller, scheduling, check clearing, collection, transaction processing, etc. Similarly, if you look at the service organization like airline, what are the operations? Ground support equipment, ground operations, flight operations, management science, which includes facility maintenance, catering, crew scheduling, flying, etc. Now, when you look at the other two aspects, finance and marketing, you have finance in commercial bank, investment securities, real estate, accounting, auditing. And in marketing, in a commercial bank, you have loans, you have to sell loans, commercial, industrial, financial, personal mortgage, and then also you take care of the trust department. So if you look at the airlines, the finance, if you see, it has accounting and finance, cash control, international exchange, etc. And marketing is traffic administration, that is reservations, schedules, sales, advertising, etc. Now, if you look at these three, operations, finance, and marketing, and if you look at in commercial banks also, these three, you can see that the blue, which is the operations, is consistently the most expensive and resource intensive part of these two firms, and that remains the same for all firms. Now let's look at and also the same thing applies for manufacturing. If you look at a manufacturing company. So for a manufacturing company, for example, you will have facilities, you will have production and inventory control, quality assurance, supply chain, manufacturing, design, industrial engineering, process analysis, and then you have finance and marketing. Okay. But you can see again here too, this is most expensive and resource intensive. Now, what about supply chain? What is the role of supply chain in all this? So in 2026, competition is no longer versus company versus company. In 2026, in today's time, competition is between supply chain versus supply chain. Okay. So if you have a collaborative supply chain that integrates, for example, if you see the soft drink supply chain that integrates a farmer and then manufacturers like syrup producer, bottler, etc. And then the distributors, which include, um, you know, retailers, which include distributors and the retailer. So if you can have a very collaborated and integrative supply chain that can provide a sustainable competitive advantage, then it becomes difficult for competitors to replicate this. So that is why supply chain is very important. Why to study OM then? Why to study operations management? So the answer to this question is efficiency in operations is very important because that offers the highest leverage for profitability. As you saw in that organization chart, it is the most resource intensive and expensive part of the organizations. Therefore, if you are able to attain efficiency in operations, you're able to offer the highest leverage for profitability. So, also, if you see in table 1.1, look at this table, okay? 20% reduction in production cost, okay? 20% reduction in production cost can increase the firm's profit. It can increase the firm's profit by 114%. So just by reducing the production cost by 20%, you're able to increase the profit contribution by 114%. To achieve the same result through marketing, you would need to increase your sales by 50%, which is really massive and often infeasible. or reduce the finance cost by 50%, which is also equally infeasible. So this is most effective and most efficient. So now let's look at how we can go about doing this. So there are 10 strategic OM decisions. Okay, so they are spread over the let's look at the basic management functions. What are the basic management functions? Planning, organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling. Okay, so now let's look at the 10 operations management decisions across these and how these management functions apply to these. So managers are responsible for all these 10 strategic decisions. So the first one is design of goods and services. It's critical because it sets the lower limits of cost. So if your design is very good, you can make sure you have the highest levels of quality at the lowest levels of cost. So you can set your limit of cost, lower limit of cost, and upper limit of quality. So that is a decision that you need to make. To what extent are you going to do this trade-off between quality and cost? So, for example, Frito-Lay, it must innovate with 40 plus product lines using multiple inspection points so as to maintain quality. So they use multiple inspection points to maintain that quality while managing a process that can move a chip from raw material to a grocery shelf in just 24 hours. So the chips to go from the manufacturing facility to grocery shelf, from the raw material stage, it takes just 24 hours. So, and if you need to have high quality chips and within 24 hours, the level of inspection, the level of innovation and quality lines, these are all very intricate and sophisticated. And Frito Lay's has 40 production lines, okay, different types. Okay, so then you have this design. Then so you have to think about design, you have to think about quality, you have to think about process, location, layout strategy, human resource, job design, supply chain management, inventory management, scheduling, maintenance, all of these decisions that go with it. So think of how you can integrate all of this and think of Frito-Lay's, which has 40 plus product lines, and it has to make sure that it goes from raw material to the grocery shelf within 24 hours. And so how these 10 decisions, starting from design, quality, process and capacity strategy, location strategy, layout strategy, how do you lay out your equipment, and what kind of human resource you need, how do you design the job, supply chain, inventory, scheduling, maintenance, how do you do all of that so that you get good quality chips delivered? Okay, now so that means you have to define what is required, what kind of cost quality, which I said, what kind of customers quality expectations, right? Then how a good is produced. Okay, and to what is the capacity, meaning how much of that, how it is produced and how much is produced. So that also means commitment to specific technology, quality, human resources, etc. Where are you going to do it? Nearness to customers, suppliers, talent, all of that. Do you want to be close to customers or close to suppliers or close to talent? Which one? Or, what is the optimal location? So you have to consider cost, infrastructure, logistics, and also the government regulations. Then you also have to think about layout inside the facility in terms of where technology and how much of movement, material movement, personal movement. So there has to be efficient flow of materials, people, and information. And then the human resource, job design and work management, right? You have to make sure you have the right kind of personnel, okay? And then the supply chain, where to produce, what to produce, where to purchase, what to purchase, from whom, under what condition, and inventory management, optimize considering customer satisfaction, supply capability, production schedules, scheduling, maintenance, etc. Okay. Now, the next thing is, how do we support these disciplines? Okay, this operations management discipline, because 40% of all the jobs are in operations management. So, operations management relies on analytics, statistics, and even the physical sciences. So, for your professional development, certifications like ASQ, Six Sigma, or Black Belt are highly sought after markers of expertise in this field. Okay, so you have all these certifications from Association for Supply Chain Management. You have American Society for Quality, Institute for Supply Chain Management, Project Management Institute, Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. So PMP is pretty um, prestigious. Along with that, you can also have from ASQ, Six Sigma, Green Belt, Black Belt. So all these are good certifications to have if you want to specialize in operations management. And considering 40% of the jobs are in this field, so I would recommend that you do these certifications. Now, the field, if you look at this operations management field, how it has evolved over the year. So it has evolved through eras. We started with scientific management under, Frederick Taylor, who emphasized you matching the right employee to the right job, and he emphasized on time and motion study. He wanted to make sure that every single task was measured in terms of time, in terms of the type of work that you need to do, the movements and everything, so that there is highest level of efficiency. So human beings were more like treated more like, thought of more like machines or robots. So it evolved from that scientific management to mass production at that time, okay, where Henry Ford was the, first person who talked about all this. Henry Ford, and also practiced it. Charles Sorensen, they did this by revolutionizing the assembly line, by moving materials, not people, just the materials would move. Today we are in the, so then we had the lean production era, quality focus. Then we had mass customization, customer focus. Today we are where we are in the globalization era. So if we look at this, what are we very focused on today? AI, Internet of Things. We are also focused on sustainability, which is, environmental focus, climate change focus. So that is what we are focused on today. Okay. So you can see how operations management as a science has evolved. So we live in a service dominant. So these are all the famous proponents of different theories of operations management. Early we had Eli Whitney, then we had Frederick Taylor, then we had this husband and wife team, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. Then we had Henry Ford, we had um, Walter Shewhart, right? And then we had Edwards, Deming. And we can see how supply chain also contributed to it. Now, we can also see how operations management, you know, other fields like industrial engineering, statistics, management, analytics, economics, physical sciences, AI, information technology, they have all contributed to operations management. While supply chain and logistics is very, very important because the efficient consumer response, collaborative planning, forecasting and replenishment, all these all these fields, including logistics, um, with containerization, international container ships, air freights, improved roads and harbors, all these, studying all these things and understanding the advances in all these fields are all important because these are all part of supply chain and logistics, which is a huge part of operations management. So this is how it has changed over a period of time. Okay, so the field has evolved. Like I said, we live in a service dominant economy where 85% of the US workforce is employed in services. While many perceive that service jobs are as low paying, but 42% of the service workers actually receive above average wages. So it's a myth and it's a misnomer that service jobs are low paying. So you have lucrative jobs in airlines maintenance and professional consulting, and they get paid more than above average wages. Okay. Now, the thing is, okay, in production, you can say how productive a person is because you can look at the input versus output. So we can measure the input output ratio and see who has the highest ratio of output as regards to input, and we can see that person is most productive. But in service, there is a productivity challenge because these characteristics of services are very different from that of goods. You can see that they are intangible and they are produced and consumed simultaneously. They are unique and they need high customer interaction and all this. While goods are tangible and they can be touch, felt, and can be stored and those kind of things. So they're so different. So, but then productivity, how do you measure it? So I'm going to show you an example of how they do it. Okay. So you can see that input is converted into output, and then we can measure for one level of for each unit of input how much of output is produced, and we can see if the more with less input, if we are able to produce more input, we are basically very productive. So how do we do that for for a service organization? So let's look at the example of Starbucks. Okay, in Starbucks, you see, they try to improve productivity through small operational changes. Okay, even with these small operational changes, they have been able to get massive returns. So they increased productivity by 27% by simply removing small things such as signature requirement on credit card purchase, or by upgrading to higher speed machine, espresso machines, and also changing the size of the ice scoop. By doing all these small things, you know, small improvements, they were able to increase the revenue and productivity improved by 27%. Okay, so they were able to increase the revenue per outlet by 250,000 to 1.2 million, okay, per outlet. So now this is a little different from the way you would look at in the traditional manufacturing. So Productivity you generally look at as units produced by input used, okay, divided by input used, okay. So let's look at this. When we look at labor productivity, okay, how do you look at it? How many units have you produced divided by how many hours of labor you've used? So for example, if you have produced 1,000 cups of coffee using 250 hours of labor, that means 4 units per labor hour, which is bad. But I'm just saying, let's say, let's forget the coffee, something more difficult. So let's say 1,000 units is produced in 250 labor hours. That means per labor hour, you're able to produce 4 units, and that is the productivity. If you increase it, if you increase it to 5 units, that means what happens? That means you're increasing the number of units produced with the same labor hours, or you're reducing the labor hours for the same number of units produced. And that's how productivity is increased. Okay. So now that was only for single factor. Similarly, you can also see units produced divided by materials. So that tells you the productivity of materials. Here, this is labor productivity. Then you can also calculate for material productivity, units produced by materials, or by for other factors also. But if you want to look at multi-factor productivity, then what do? You look at the output divided by, you add all the inputs in dollar terms, because this will be in hours, this will be in you know maybe pounds, this will be in kilowatts, this will be in dollars. So they'll all be in different units. So you have to convert all of them into dollars, and you can express the output and input in dollars and look at their productivity. So that is how multi-factor productivity is calculated. So for example, you can see this, you have in the old system, you can see staff of four works 8 hours a day. Okay, so then they produced 8 titles a day. So then you would say, how many titles were they producing per labor hour? 8 titles divided by 32 labor hours, that is 0.25 title per labor hour. But now they have, let's say, introduced a new system. Maybe they have a new production system, new technology. So what they did is, then they want to see if the new system has improved the productivity. Then they see, okay, now we have 14 titles instead of 8 titles for the same number of hours. So the productivity has improved because now our um, titles are 0.4375. Okay, we are able to produce more titles, but another problem is that we see that the overheads have increased. Okay, earlier we had a payroll cost of 640 and overhead of 400, but now the overhead is 800 per day. Okay, so now old labor productivity would have been um, you know 0.25 title per hour, but now we have 0.4375 title per hour. So we can say that there is a 75% increase in productivity. How did we know that? We look at the new productivity minus the old productivity divided by the old productivity, and we say there is a 75% increase. Okay, now, but we can also look at it using multi-factor, because in this case, if you see, like I said, you know, the overhead is slightly different, right? So if you want to look at the overhead, we can say 8 titles per day divided by overhead costs, 640 plus 400. And in this case, it is 648 divided by um, $1,040 and 14 divided by $1,040. And if you look at that, then if you look at all the just the dollars instead of the just the labor, if you look at total product to all the factors put together, then we can say the increase is only 26%, not 70%. But this is more balanced because here you're looking at all inputs, not just one input. Okay. So, and that is how you do the productivity calculation. And it's very important to know productivity calculation is very important so that you know who's producing how much. Okay. Now, we can say that single factor productivity is easy to track, but our MBA level analysis requires multi-factor productivity. Okay. So it's dangerous to look at just labor productivity in isolation, like we saw here. Okay. Because a firm might replace workers with expensive robots, which will make labor productivity look great, but overall multi-factor productivity and profits might actually drop. Okay. So, what we want to look at is multi-factor productivity. Okay. Now, um, in the US, productivity grows at roughly, you know, at productivity grows at a roughly 2% annual. Okay. Management is at the most important contributor for productivity increase. 52% of the increase in productivity comes from management. Okay. And 38 comes from capital and 10 from labor. So most critical variable is management. Okay. Even capital and labor are important, but in order to make sure that you use capital, labor, technology, knowledge effectively, you need to have good management. Okay. So this is very important. Okay. Also, when you're looking at productivity, okay, how do you measure? You see, quality will change when the quantity of inputs and um, inputs and outputs may remain the same. So how do if you just look at input to output, that's just looking at, how much you got and how much you got out, but then we are not measuring quality there. Also, sometimes productivity may not be just because of the input and output. There may be some external factors that may affect. For example, when COVID happened, everything affected the productivity, right? So then also sometimes in certain, like in service sector, precise units of measurement is not easy. It's not possible. So that's also very difficult. So these are problems in productivity measurement. So given all this, okay, now what is important to improve labor productivity? Most important is basic education. That too appropriate education. Okay. You have to make sure your labor force diet is good. The social overhead, meaning, if, for example, daycare facilities and those kind of things, you should provide them. Also, the healthcare, social overhead is important because of that, that makes labor available for us. So, this is a challenge to maintain the labor force, keep enhancing their skills especially when the technology is rapidly changing with AI, advances in quantum tech and AI and climate change, etc. Okay, so this has become a big challenge, especially in developed nations, right? About one third of the US job applicants don't have um, the requisite skills in reading and writing or math. So that's the kind of labor force that we have. So if we have that kind of labor force, how is the nation's competitiveness going to be affected? Okay, so we need to have strong commitment to improve the labor. So that's very important. These are issues. Okay. Now, if you see, half of the 17-year-olds in US cannot correctly answer these type of questions. What is the area of the triangle? So simple. Multiply the length by breadth. That's all you need to do. That also is an example, difficult. Algebra is a big problem. Okay. Um, which here, simple thing, which of the following is true about 84% of 100? All those things. Okay. Now, also, um, inflation and taxes. These are all, going to affect the capital. And these are real problems that we're facing. And because of this, capital may be not sufficiently available. And decline in capital per employee will also, you can see in these diagrams, you can see how manually you're doing this and robots are doing this. Okay, so this is more productive, but relying on labor can cut short-term unemployment, but long-term productivity and wages will be definitely impacted. Okay, and that is why management is very important. Okay, because they know how to use all of these in the most effective way. Now, productivity, like I said, in service sector is more difficult to compute and also maintain because it's labor intensive and each labor is different in terms of their attributes, desires, and service sector means intellectual tasks. How do you measure that? How do you mechanize that? How do you automate that? And how do you even measure the quality? So these are the challenges. Okay. So now let's look at one example of Taco Bell. So Taco Bell achieved breakthrough by shifting food preparation to suppliers. So that basically helped them to cut in-store labor by 15 hours. And this saved millions of dollars annually just by doing that. Okay. So they just their preparation time was cut and um, people were just they were able to manage 30 restaurants instead of 5. Each manager was able to manage 30 restaurants instead of 5 restaurants because of all these things. So and because they had asked their suppliers to bring all those um, prepared material, floor space also was saved. And stores also were able to service customers faster. They were able to save on water, energy, and they were able to help use sustainable methods of cooking, green inspired cooking. So, huge savings and also in a very sustainable way. Okay. But as you can see, things are rapidly changing, challenges are different. In today's world, challenges are um, managers, operations managers have to face new types of hurdles to make sure that supply chain is resilient. There is war happening. You see where the energy costs are increasing, and supply chain is not, um, you know, smooth in certain areas. So how do you make your supply chain resilient in all these external factors affecting us? And mass customization, that is a huge new thing. So we must also navigate conflictive perspective of stakeholders, not just owners, but the community and the environment. We have to focus on sustainable processes. Ethics is very, very crucial, and that's come to the forefront because we have witnessed several scams and problems. So we need to create an environment of mutual trust so that there is long-term operational success. So with with all this in mind, okay, we are concluding chapter 1. Okay. With all this in mind, we understand how crucial operations management as a field is.